I had to play this ruthless game to save my sister from our terrible family, after being mistreated and kicked out at 17. Since every choice I make now will affect not just my life, but also my sister's future, I, a 25-year-old female, feel compelled to relate my tale. This time has been planned for years, and now that it has arrived, I need advice to ensure that I don't make a mistake. Living in Pine Grove as a child was like being in a separate reality than what you see on television. It's the sort of area where children learn to count by counting the empty bottles of their parents, and ambulance sirens are your nightly lullaby. When my parents gave birth to me, they were hardly teenagers. Both parents had no business parenting a child, and mom was 16 and dad was 18. We lived in a dilapidated two-room apartment in the Riverside complex, which ought to have been demolished decades ago, because the walls were so thin you could hear everything, including drug sales, domestic arguments, and the cries of infants at 3 in the morning. Due to unpaid expenses, we frequently lost heat over the winter. Early on, I discovered that it was best to sleep in layers, starting with my school clothes, followed by my weekend attire, and finally any outerwear I could locate at the nearby donation center. Although the journey to school was an experience in and of itself, school was my haven. In order to tidy up any mess from the previous evening, I would get up at 5 in the morning. Sometimes it was vomit from mom's awful night, and other times it was broken glass from dad's most recent outburst. When permission sheets needed to be signed and both parents were unconscious, I had to learn how to precisely forge their signatures, which I did by the time I was 7 years old. My elementary school teachers made subtle attempts to assist. Every day, Mrs. Quincy would inadvertently pack an extra lunch. When my shirt got too soiled, the janitor, Mr. Yilson, would leave his closet open so I could get a fresh one. Miss Brafty always managed to have socks in my size in her lost and found cabinet. In retrospect, I saw that they were all attempting to establish a safety net without drawing notice from my parents or the police. Not all of the other children were nice. They would ridicule my outfits from charity stores or the fact that I would stuff my pockets full of cafeteria food for supper. To be honest, though, it was easier to deal with their cruelty than their sympathy. I could, at least, defend myself with contempt. Sympathy only made me feel powerless. When I reached 15, everything changed. I was able to secure employment at our neighborhood grocery store, Yilson's Market. I met Mrs. Colson, the store manager there, and she would end up being my lifeline to another world. A middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair and cardigans adorned with cat pins, she didn't look particularly noteworthy. I couldn't see it in myself, but she saw something in me. It was difficult during those initial weeks at Yilson's. I was attempting to conceal the injuries from Dad's bad days while juggling work, school, and my personal life. Mrs. Colson began assigning me to extra shifts whenever she saw the bruises, but she never inquired about them directly. While we worked together, she would teach me about bookkeeping, customer service, and inventory management. More significantly, though, she would share with me tales of her time in college, her trips, and a world outside of Pine Grove. She taught me how to build credit, balance a checkbook, and make future plans, things no one else had bothered to explain. Ashley, she would add, you have more potential in your little finger than most people have. Never listen to someone who tells you otherwise. I created my first bank account with her help. Neither of my parents had ever had a step, so it was a big step. I meticulously recorded my earnings and spending in a notebook that I concealed beneath a loose floorboard in my room, making sure to preserve every dime I could. Even though it felt like an unattainable ambition at the time, Mrs. Colson assisted me with starting a tiny college fund. Then the news that would alter everything arrived. Mom was expecting a child once more. Mom wandered into our small kitchen as I was standing there, attempting to rescue enough edible portions from a stale loaf of bread to prepare dinner. She was crying this time, but she was high, as usual. I'm pregnant, she said, as if she were making a weather-related remark. Your father's going to be pissed. My stomach sank with my heart. Not another child in this hell, was all that was on my mind. That evening, I printed out information packets that I knew my parents would never read, and used the library computer to explore adoption agencies. Dad warned me to keep my mouth shut and threw a beer bottle at the wall when I attempted to bring up the subject of adoption. It was a difficult pregnancy. I tried desperately to stop Mom from using, but she persisted. I would conceal her narcotics, only to uncover fresh caches. After pouring out the alcohol, I would return home to find fresh bottles. I made an anonymous call to social services, but it was unsuccessful. Pregnant addicts were not unusual in our community. Seely battled withdrawal symptoms for the first 2 weeks after birth in the NICU. Every day after work and school, I went to see her, sitting next to her incubator and observing her small body trembling. At that point, I vowed to do whatever it needed to have at least one person on this baby's side. I began working 2 jobs, the Sunrise Diner on the weekends and Yilson's after school on weekdays. I put every dime into my secret account that wasn't used for really necessary expenses. I learned how to stretch my money and make emergency plans for Mrs. Coulson, who also assisted me with budgeting. We both understood it was just her way of helping me buy things for Seely, but she even made a special employee discount for baby stuff. My resolve to get us both out grew along with Seely. I would get up at 4 in the morning to study before school, work until it was time to go, and then come home to look after Seely. 3 hours of sleep and cold coffee became my go-to fuel. In fact, my grades went up. Desperation and resentment are strong motivators. However, secrets cannot be kept in a tiny community, particularly from addicts who are constantly seeking their next hit. My parents became aware that I consistently had money for Seely's necessities, such as clothes, formula, and diapers. They started requesting an increasing amount of my wages. Dad would slur, "Family helps family," obstructing my way to my room. "We need that money for bills." However, I had witnessed far too many of my earlier contributions become small plastic bags and empty bottles. I began lying about my pay, claiming that my hours had been reduced and that business was slow. When Mom arrived at Yilson's during my shift and yelled about unappreciative kids and family devotion, the facade fell apart. Mom was too far gone for Mrs. Coulson's attempts to defuse the situation. She said Mrs. Coulson was taking advantage of me, knocked over displays, and threatened to call the labor board. They phoned the cops. It was embarrassing. Everything came apart that night when I got home. Dad was waiting for me, itching for a fight, and more inebriated than normal. "Your mother says you've been lying about money," he snarled as he swayed in the corridor. "We have bills to pay with that money. I'll repay you if you give it to me." I declined. I stood my ground for the first time in my life. "That money is for Seely," I responded, attempting to maintain a level voice. "I've witnessed the fate of the funds I give you. I'm finished." Chaos ensued. Dad began hurling my belongings onto the front lawn while yelling about unappreciative kids and familial responsibilities. Seely was crying and reaching for me as Mom stood in the doorway. The neighbors hurriedly averted their gazes after peeking through their blinds. It was better to overlook family drama in our area. I was 17 years old when I stood with 2 garbage bags of stuff in our front yard, which was littered with rubbish, and I saw my baby sister cry for me through the window. My dreams are continually plagued by that sight. Fortunately, I was taken in by my friend Vesica's family. Despite their own lack of wealth, they made room in their modest 3-bedroom home on the opposite side of town. Mrs. Kivara, Vesica's mother, assisted me in submitting financial assistance and scholarship applications. Her father used their old station wagon to teach me how to drive. They merely required that I maintain good grades and assist with domestic duties. They never asked for rent. I learned what a true family looked like from living with the Kivaras. During their family dinners, there was genuine conversation rather than argumentation. Rather than fighting when intoxicated, they used baked cakes to celebrate birthdays. Yes, they had issues, but rather than burying them in drugs and bottles, they dealt with them together. However, Seely remained enmeshed in upheaval while I was at last finding stability. On occasion, I would spot her at the playground or on her way to school. She was developing too quickly. Her clothing, which were either church donations or hand-me-downs from neighbors, were usually too big or too little. Whenever I could, I would give her money and teach her to conceal it in her stuffed animal so our parents wouldn't notice. Our covert emissary was Mrs. Coulson. When Seely visited the business, she would offer her free treats and update me on her health. Mrs. Coulson would tell me, "She's got your spirit." When we checked in once a week, "She shares your intelligence. She is surviving." It wasn't enough to survive. I wanted Seely to be successful. With newfound vigor, I pushed myself into my studies. My SAT results gave me access to opportunities one never would have imagined. I sobbed for hours after receiving the acceptance letter from State University, along with a full scholarship offer. I couldn't just drive back on the weekends because it was 6 hours away, which was probably for the best. The distance would allow me to concentrate on my objective, which was to create a secure existence so that I could finally save Celie. It was a culture shock at college. Being from a wealthy suburb, my roommate didn't understand why I had 3 jobs and a full school load, while I was saving money to send home to Celie via Mrs. Coulson. My classmates grumbled about their parents not purchasing them new cars. I minored in business administration while majoring in finance. I felt like I was getting closer to my objective with each class. I gained knowledge about estate planning, taxes, and investing. I began to learn how money actually worked, not just how to get it, but also how to use it to my advantage. I was able to secure an internship at a prominent investing firm during my junior year. For their entry-level jobs, the starting pay was higher than my parents' combined highest earnings during their prime. I put in more effort than everybody else. I arrived early and stayed late. I immediately accepted their offer of a full-time job following graduation. My existence now, 8 years after I was kicked out of my childhood home, would have looked unthinkable to my adolescent self. My home is in a nice neighborhood. I have a good savings account and a steady work with perks. I never have to check my financial balance before making a grocery purchase, and I drive a dependable car. But without Celie, none of it mattered. Now that she is 11, Mrs. Coulson informs me that things have only gotten worse at home. Mom switched from medications to more difficult substances. Due to DUIs, Dad has been in and out of jail. In only the last year, they had been evicted 3 times. No one has bothered to report them, which is the only reason they haven't lost custody. That will soon change. I've been recording everything for years, including every instance of intoxication, missing school days, and instances where they use their rent money to buy narcotics. Mrs. Coulson has documented instances of neglect that she has seen. Vesica's mother has kept track of the occasions when Celie has arrived at their home underdressed or famished. I've spoken with family law specialists. I'm ready, even though I know the process will be messy. Now that I have the means, I can battle for custody and provide Celie with the security she needs. However, I want to approach this intelligently. I, therefore, require guidance. I intend to show them my accomplishment by inviting them to my home. My parents are people I know. They react exclusively to manipulation and money. They will want a portion of what I have once they see it. I'm relying on their avarice. I can already envision how it will transpire. Like they attempted to embezzle my teenage earnings, they will attempt to move in and take advantage of my success. However, I will be establishing the conditions this time. When they won't go, I'll give them a choice. Either help with Celie's voluntary custody transfer, or I'll throw all I've got at CPS in the courts. I want to know if anyone has done something similar effectively. It may sound calculating, but I've studied the most skilled manipulators to save my sister. I must play their game, but I want to do it well. This is the culmination of my entire existence. This was the reason for every extra shift, late-night study session, every dollar saved. I will never let Celie down again. I'll provide updates as events unfold. Update 1. I appreciate all of your help and guidance. Even though I took action today, I'm still analyzing what transpired. My former neighborhood was my first stop. It seemed unreal to traverse those well-known cracked sidewalks. It was like viewing a film of my former existence. Children were still using deflated basketballs to play on the street. Mothers were still shouting from paint-peeled windows. It was the same ice cream truck that was traveling about with its broken music. At Yilson's Market, training a teenage girl who looked so much like me at her age, Mrs. Coulson was right where I expected her to be. Even though she has arthritis and is in her 60s, she still wears those cat pins and stands erect. Everything I had practiced crumbled when our gazes locked across the store. "Look who finally learned to use a comb," she replied, using an old joke to diffuse the situation. She kept an extra hairbrush in her office for my more hectic mornings when I was 15. We ended up having a conversation during her lunch break in her office. That old coffee machine, which sounds like a dying automobile engine, is still with her. She told me everything I hadn't heard. Since she turned 11, Celie has worked at Joe's Diner, off the books, of course. Mrs. Coulson handed her a hollow book in which she keeps all of her money. It seems that my survival skills, including my previous coping mechanisms for our parents' difficult times, were passed down to my sister. She's smart about it, according to Mrs. Coulson, smarter than you were, even. Celie has an entire network of locations she can turn to when things become tough at home, and she conceals a prepaid phone in her school locker. The children of the neighbors believe she is simply hosting frequent sleepovers. Mrs. Colson then produced a hefty envelope made of manila. She stated, "I've been keeping records, times, dates, and incidents. Each time your parents arrived intoxicated or intoxicated, each time Seely showed up with strange bruises or hunger, each time they made an attempt to steal or create a scene. This is what the other store owners have been doing. In the same way that they attempted to protect me, the entire community has been covertly defending my sister." At the convenience shop, Mr. Ben allows her to complete her homework in his back room. Instead of discarding damaged books, M. Rodriguez from the library saves them for her. Old Joe from the diner even tells the health inspector that she is his niece while slipping her additional food. The most difficult aspect was going to my parents' place. With peeling paint, missing shingles, and a yard full of enigmatic stains, the building appeared to have aged decades in a matter of years. By the steps, a broken tricycle that I had never seen before was rusting. It was like a thundercloud clap when it knocked. With her hair unkempt and a cigarette hanging down, Mom opened the door. When she first saw the suit, the pearls, and the leather bag, she didn't recognize me. In a matter of seconds, her gaze changed from skeptical to perplexed to astonished. "Get out here, crank," she muttered. Nolly, at 2 p.m., Dad staggered to the door with a drink in his hand. He had lost more teeth and put on weight. His eyes immediately went to my watch, my backpack, and my car parked in front of the street. As the recognition dawned on him, more slowly, like a weird stranger, which I was, in many respects, they invited me in. I didn't see any cats, but the house smelled like cat poop. A road of empty bottles led to the couch. Mom began to pick things up frantically, as though it would make up for years of neglect. The start of their conversation was the true shock. They pretended that the past had never occurred, that they had never expelled me, and that they had always encouraged my success. While starting another cigarette, Mom remarked, "We always knew you had it in you. Your father's side is the source of your business acumen." I gave them space to speak while I watched them create an alternate world in which they were happy, encouraging parents. Dad kept bringing up bills, giving away that he was having money problems. Mom continued talking about how family should stay together and how lonely I must be in the big city. Everything else vanished when Seely got home. With her rucksack clasped like a shield, she stood in the doorway and gazed at me as though she were seeing a ghost. Despite growing taller, she is still too skinny and is dressed in clothing that was worn out 3 years ago. "I promised," was my only response. She ran to me, dropping her backpack as our parents awkwardly stared, presumably trying to figure out how to make the most of this reunion. We held each other. I left shortly after that. I set the hook before I went, but I made up an excuse about a work call. I announced my large, 5-bedroom suburban home, invited everyone to come over this weekend, and saw money signs light up their eyes. I gave Seely a burner phone and gave her instructions to keep it hidden in a whisper. I didn't have enough money to go on a major binge, but I did have enough to make sure our parents would be there on Saturday. I looked at Seely in my rearview mirror as I drove off. Holding the concealed phone like a lifeline, she stood on the porch. "Little sister, only a couple more days. We have a few days left before this game is officially over. On Saturday, the second stage begins. The documents have already been prepared by my attorney. If necessary, Mrs. Colson and half the community are prepared to testify. Let us first examine the extent to which our parents' greed will lead them along this garden path that I have constructed. If you would like to hear what comes next, please let me know. This weekend is when the Real show begins." Update 2. The family visit became something I never would have imagined, a clear demonstration of why I must remove Seely from the house immediately. At 10 a.m., I picked them up in my SUV. Mom had really tried, sporting a dress that I'm fairly certain she stole from Target, with the price tag still partially visible beneath her arm. Dad was dressed in the same rumpled shirt and tie he usually wears to DUI hearings. Seely was dressed in her cleanest possession, her school uniform. It was a weird drive. Dad continued saying that I was just as good with money as he was, while Mom kept remarking on every posh building we passed. Sitting quietly in the back, Seely absorbed everything. Several times, I caught her gaze in the rearview mirror. She knew exactly what was going on. Mom actually let out a gasp as we arrived at my place. Although it is by no means a mansion, it might as well be in comparison to our former neighborhood. Dad immediately glanced at my neighbors' boats in their drives, and began figuring out just how much he could borrow. Once we were inside, the real performance began. Mom started organizing her belongings right away. She remarked, "This living room is just perfect for my collection," alluding to the box of broken figurines she had owned since I was a child. Dad was measuring the garage in his mind and discussing how he could turn it into a workshop. I gave them the entire tour and played along. Their eyes became larger and their clues more potent with every room. Mom began discussing the sense of emptiness in the house and the desire for a familial touch. Dad was often talking about his handyman abilities and how he could actually keep up a property like this. Lunchtime was the tipping point. I had placed an order for simple catering, consisting of salads and sandwiches. I had a fancy assortment of wine, and Mom had 3 glasses. That's when she dropped the bomb. She insisted she stumbled. "You know, we've been considering moving. Even though this neighborhood seems pleasant, you have so many empty rooms." Dad jumped right in. "We may assist with the expenses up here. I could make things better. You would no longer need to be by yourself." I was grinning on the inside, but I kept my look neutral. They were doing exactly what I had instructed. I told them I would give it some thought and get back to them the following week. They were almost pitiful in their excitement. When I was able to get Celie alone and showed her my home office, while our parents were preoccupied, picturing their future life in my living room, it was the most illuminating moment. As soon as the door shut, she started crying. She said, "They sold my bed last week, claimed to be in need of cash for bills, but they simply didn't have to." Complete. We were both aware of the money's whereabouts. She told me everything, including how she has been taking showers at school after her early morning job in the cafeteria, how they have been renting out a portion of the house to some pals who traffic drugs, and how she hasn't had hot water in months since the bills weren't paid. Downstairs, Mom was growing more inebriated and talking louder. She was definitely searching for more alcohol because I could hear her digging through my kitchen cabinets. While talking on the phone, Dad boasted about his daughter's accomplishments, her large home, and potential investment chances. When I saw Mom attempting to fit my silver candlesticks into her pocketbook, it was the last straw. She said she was merely staring at them when I challenged her. In an attempt to mediate the situation, Dad suggested that I give them a loan, only for the time being. That night, as I drove them home, I overheard Dad's aspirations to make the neighborhood better and Mom's inebriated intentions to redecorate my house. When I dropped them off, Celie gripped my hand, and I gave her another burner phone because her previous one had magically vanished after our parents discovered it. I gave my lawyer a call that evening. The documents are prepared. They will discover exactly what sort of family reunion I have been organizing when they eventually call about moving in next week, along with statements from Mrs. Colson and the neighbors regarding their continued mistreatment of Celie. I have added all of the information from today to my file, including the attempted theft, the intoxicated behavior, and the disclosures of their present living circumstances. The trap is in place. They believe they are going to move in with me and take advantage of my prosperity. Rather, they will have to decide whether to relinquish custody of Celie or deal with the full weight of CPS and the criminal justice system. Even though I feel bad sometimes for being so calculated, I know I'm doing what is morally wrong when I see Celie's expression when she told me her bed had been sold. The encounter I've been preparing for years will be the final update. Update 3. Although the emotional toll was greater than I anticipated, the story's conclusion went just as planned. This is how it all transpired. As I had predicted, Mom called on Wednesday. Her talking to authority figures voice was an attempt to sound sober, as he does when he's anxious. Dad was on speakerphone, clearing his throat every few seconds. They, not me, wanted to talk about the possibility of a living arrangement for a serious family conversation about their future. I invited them over. The bait was immediately taken. Over the phone, I could almost hear them giving each other high fives. On Thursday, they arrived with 2 suitcases an hour early. It would have been funny if it weren't so depressing. They were unaware that a CPS case worker and my attorney were waiting in my home office. The manila files on my dining room table should have been the first clue that something wasn't right. As Dad began his rehearsed speech on family togetherness and supporting one another, Mom gave them an anxious look. I allowed them to speak for precisely 7 minutes, during which they made empty, veiled attempts to gain entry into my house and made vows to clean up, obtain jobs, and be better parents. I opened the first folder after that. Let's discuss the drug deals that took place in your living room last month. I remarked, referring to witness accounts and police files. Or perhaps the 3 months of utilities that were not paid. Or should we talk about Seely's unexplained disappearance of school supplies? It was almost funny how quickly their faces altered. Mom's phony smile broke. Dad's self-assured stance faltered. The proof of neglect: neighbor statements, school reports, strange injury records, Mrs. Colson's comprehensive logs of their public intoxication, and testimonials from half the community regarding their continued drug use were all laid out by me. I pushed another folder forward and stated, "This is what's going to happen. These documents pertain to a custody transfer. All of this remains between us if you sign them. Refuse, and the DA's office and CPS receive everything in these folders." Mom used her typical strategies, sobbing, begging, and saying they could change. Dad tried to make me feel bad about being loyal to the family. They turned to threats when that failed. Dad hissed, "You can't prove anything. Nobody will believe you." At that point, I used my trump card. Using my laptop, I showed video records from the previous few months, including images from the security cameras of my neighbors, drug sales, fights while intoxicated, and neglect of Seely. Quietly, I murmured, "The DA will believe this. So will the judge." The ensuing hush was deafening. 3 hours were spent negotiating, threatening, crying, and ultimately resigning. The documents were signed by them. They were immediately notarized by my lawyer. I said, "Get out," after it was finished. "If you ever try to contact Seely without her consent, everything in these folders goes public." They didn't even ask to bid her farewell before leaving. They were attempting to bargain one last helping hand. When they spoke about money, I refused to reply to their requests. That night, Seely moved in. Everything she owned had been stolen or sold, leaving her with just one backpack. She sobbed as she stood in her new room, which was her first actual bedroom since she was a toddler, whispering, "Is it really over?" "Yes," I said, "it's really over." We went shopping for her first actual bed the following day. Everything was hers to choose, including the comforter, pillows, and bedding. No more sharing a mattress on the floor with Mom's friends or sleeping on a shabby couch. Mrs. Colson joined us in celebrating this past weekend. She brought Seely's hollow book, which she had been using for years to conceal her money. We totaled her money, which came to $847.23. I assisted her in opening her first bank account and matched it dollar for dollar. Seely and I went to register for her new school yesterday. When the principal looked over her files, he was immediately astounded. Like her sister, Mrs. Colson would say, "In spite of everything, our parents haven't made an effort to get in touch. Several times, their friends have contacted, most likely in search of their next score. All of their numbers were blocked. This time, the house feels better, fuller." Seely was watching TV in her room last night when I heard her laughing. Genuine laughter, not the apprehensive type we were taught to diffuse stressful circumstances. She asked if she could have a friend over this morning. I was moved to tears by such a simple plea. It's her first time hosting a friend. I never invited them to a safe house. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who helped me get through this. When I doubted myself, your advice kept me strong. To anyone in a similar circumstance, keep track of everything. Make your case, exercise patience, and, above all, never give up. Seely is currently sleeping in her new room, bed, and actual house. She no longer has to worry about what she will wake up to for the first time in her life. We made it. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking, real-life stories happening around you.